We all know creative people. We have a tendency to think of truly creative people as being fundamentally different than we are, fundamentally different than I am. And then the corollary to that is, well, if I'm not creative by like this person or that person or the person I just read about or saw on television, then I guess I'm just not creative, and I have to learn to live a life without being one of those people who makes new things happen. I think that's a lie. I think being creative is not like being tall or short. I don't think being creative is solely a quirk of biology or some sort of a trick in our hard drive or something related only to how we were raised. I think being creative is a mindset that can be developed and refined and strengthened just like any other muscle. Maybe one of the first problems we run into when we're thinking about, gee, can I be creative, is that we have a false idea of how creative a person has to be before they are creative. If we know examples of people who can just sit down and draw flawlessly, and that's not us, well then we write ourselves off as not being creative. But creativity most often happens inside of some boundaries, inside of constraints. That's why there is, for a writer on some days, nothing more terrifying than a blank sheet of paper. There are no boundaries. There are no definitions. There are no constraints. They're confronted by an infinite range of variables and they don't know where to start. It doesn't have to be like that. Life itself, our work, our home environment, the things at our disposal, our resources, can provide not just limitations to our creativity, but a place to start. What I mean by that is a couple of things. There's nothing new under the sun, right? So stop thinking of yourself as being uncreative if you've never thought an original thought. You know what? Nobody else has either. And since imitation is the sincerest form of flattery, imitation can be the gateway to being more creative. Here's what I think part of what I mean by that is. You can become more creative by stealing with your eyes. Now that does not just mean watching how the people around you do their job, but watching how the people around you are doing their job with the idea of what part of what they're doing is better than the way I do it, and what part of what they're doing can be improved by the way I do it. Can you see that that's a baby step towards inventing a completely new process? Part of being more creative is stealing with your eyes all the time wherever you go, and that is looking around and identifying the aspects of what you're seeing in the spaces you walk into in terms of whether or not they're pleasing and beautiful and achievable, and then catalog that stuff. Put it in the back of your mind and imitate it when you're responsible for coming up with a concept or an idea. You flip through the Pinterest pages in the back of your mind and think, now where did I see something that would lend itself to X, Y, or Z? The examples of things that you have seen are not constraints, they're opportunities. But the constraints in your budget and in your tooling and your time can force their own creativity. So backing up for just a second to the idea that we've met people who are extremely creative, yes. But instead of letting those savants make us feel small, let's talk about some of the characteristics that those people seem to bring to the party that contribute to their creativity. For instance, sometimes they're driven by bursts of inspiration. Well, you know what? Maybe we could be driven by bursts of inspiration if we would give ourselves the latitude to follow it. When we get a good idea, to hit pause and say, man, I've got to pursue that. That's what a burst of inspiration looks like. Or maybe sometimes they seem to use the same environment we live in to think of wildly different applications. All right? What that might mean is we go through our days thinking, what if, instead of this is what I've got, and why not, instead of this is the way I've always done it. What about that? What if these two questions of what if and why not become something that we ask ourselves all the time? If we do that, we are beginning to think and act in the way that extremely creative people think and act. What about the fact that extremely creative people seem to rehearse creativity? That is, when a person knows how to draw or is learning how to draw, what do you see them doing in their spare time? You see them drawing. If a person wants to learn how to sing, perform musically, what do you see them doing in their spare time? Singing or performing musically. What does that mean for us? Maybe it means that we're looking for opportunities to do the things that we want or feel compelled to do. And we set aside time. Maybe extremely creative people don't waste their time in the things that don't add to their creative expression. Maybe time management, maybe something as mundane as time management is key for me to learn to be more creative. I don't know, maybe that's trying to reduce something to formula. What about the fact that the people I know who are extremely creative seem to be able to accept the tension of starting versus finishing? I had a guy in the shop just the other day and I asked him if he wanted to make a railroad spike knife, and he said, well, yeah, but I'll have to finish it. Oh, wait. I don't think extremely creative people are bound by the notion that I won't have enough time to resolve this. And I think they resist the notion that I can't start this because I don't know that I have enough days set aside. You see what I mean? They are comfortable with the doubt of having the ability to bring something across the finish line, and they just start. It's like any other skill. If you don't know how to do something, start doing it. And by the time you're done with the first one, you're going to be pretty good. What about the idea that extremely creative people seem to feel things more deeply and respond to things more strongly? Maybe we can do that. Maybe if we consciously get rid of some of our emotional constipation and react to the people around us in a more heartfelt way. Maybe if we give up the notion that men never cry, maybe that can give us the latitude to approach problems more creatively. I don't know, but I see this in the creative souls around me. What if, in the same way that the creative people I know watch for beauty, my mother-in-law was a wonderful artist, and she would recognize a sunset. She would recognize the colors in a forest, she was hungry to recognize beauty. This seems to be a characteristic of highly creative people. And they're grateful for beauty. Heck, we can cultivate that. We can cultivate the ability to recognize beauty or something new when we see it, instead of just glossing it because it's not part of our survival response. We're not going to make any money off of it. We can't capitalize on it. Therefore, it's not important. That's not creative. That's mercenary. Maybe creative people are not by nature so mercenary. Maybe they don't resent the constraints of budget or time or tooling or skills, and instead learn to use those constraints as the boundaries that they can sort of ricochet off of and end up in a more creative space, utilizing the things they're familiar with to do something brand new. Maybe, now here's something we can all practice. Maybe a highly creative person has inoculated themselves against doubt and fear of failure. When I see someone who can draw, or a fantastically gifted blacksmith, or fill in the blank, a musician, they walk out there to perform with confidence because of practice and because they're not afraid to fail. Fear of failure stifles creativity more than anything else. My dad, smart, hardworking. His upbringing was in a family that tended to be critical. I think that upbringing stifled my dad's willingness to take a chance on doing something where he could fail. If you want to be more creative, determine right now you're no longer going to be thwarted because you're afraid someone will be critical. What about this? What if extremely creative people are not afraid of solitude? What if extremely creative people don't spend every spare moment doom scrolling or watching a stupid television show? What if the extremely creative people don't have time to watch a YouTube video? I don't know, but there's something about solitude and quiet that enables us to think new thoughts, or new thoughts about things that we already knew, which is a variation on a theme, right? Extreme creativity is not creating something new out of whole cloth as much as it is making new connections with things that are already mundane. Now, at the risk of tooting my own horn, I think one of the most worthwhile connections I ever made from something mundane was a day when I was using a single jack driving concrete stakes, and I realized, wait a minute, I don't need two identical faces on a sledgehammer. I need a face for hammering and a face for digging dirt. What an elementary observation. But it gave me the idea of a concrete form-setting hammer. You can do that too. Every innovation in construction, all of the construction ideas that people write to me about, hey, I'm bringing this to market, I'm bringing this to market, they're all combining 2 or 3 aspects of things that already exist into one new package. That's creativity. What about the notion that extremely creative people are kind of hopeful? They're kind of optimistic. It's kind of like fishing. Fishing is the domain of optimists. You would never get up early in the morning and go out in a pouring rain and put your boat on a lake and row out there and throw a worm over the side of the boat if you didn't believe in your heart of hearts you might catch a fish. And it's the same way with being creative. We need to be optimistic about our ability to create something worthwhile and maybe beautiful, and maybe compelling, maybe something that has within it a story, or maybe you're a poet. When you sit down to that blank piece of paper, you need to be optimistic that I'm going to write something here that is going to move someone, even if it's only me. What about this? What if a creative person somehow either was never schooled into doing it, or never reacted to fear like we mentioned in such a way that they ever suppress a desire to create? Cy Swan, my friend Cy Swan, when that guy gets an idea, man, he's going to do it. Which brings up the notion that a whole bunch of Cy's creativity, which is immense, is because, man, he's a worker and a doer. We can all learn to be workers and doers. In fact, we can compensate for mediocrity in so many ways just by hard work. So, my boy Adam, when he went to college, he thought, I'm not as smart as all the guys in this accounting program, but I can outwork them. And so the ability to stay on task and exert yourself and wear yourself out in the pursuit of a worthwhile goal pulls you out of mediocrity, and I think it's the same with creativity. If you think your creativity is mediocre, work at it harder. Hard work compensates for almost any shortcoming. How about this? One of the things that you can do to increase your creativity is be selective in who your friends and associates are. There's this cliche, if you show me who your 5 friends are, the 5 people you spend the most time with, I'm going to know you. And so if you begin to associate voluntarily with people who are creative, who produce good things, who think good thoughts, who make new associations, who value new information, who are not locked into their confirmation biases, well, I do it this way because it's always the way I did it. If you can associate with people who are continually continually asking those two golden questions of what if and why not, you will unavoidably become more creative. If this was helpful, leave it in the comments. If it wasted your time, leave that in the comments. But mostly, if you have other ideas or book titles or anything else that can help us as we try to decide how am I going to spend my days in a more creative way, would you put that in the comments, please? Because the comments are, after all, the most instructive part of this channel. Thanks for watching Essential Craftsman, and keep up the good work.